the second to the last panel of this conference, and we have a special conversation for you today. And this is my favorite panel because it is a panel of us. Those on this panel are the ones who make philanthropy happen in Africa and in other parts of the world, because we are all philanthropy support organizations. So these are my colleagues from different regions, and we're sharing lessons from the Global South. And I'll have them introduce themselves, starting from Antonio.
Good after lunch, everyone. My name is Bweme Antonio. I'm based in Kampala, Uganda, and I'm the regional coordinator for Africa at Wings. For those that don't know Wings is a global philanthropy support and development network, and we have 220 members in 58 countries across the globe. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. Wonderful to be with you all. The most difficult thing about that panel was agreeing to do a dance. It doesn't come naturally to Brits like myself. So thank you for tolerating that. So my name is Mary-Louise Gourlay, also known as Mary Lou. I'm the Managing Director for Europe at Forward Global. And Forward Global is a community of about 400 philanthropists globally. We say globally, I'm just going to call that out. Actually, we work with people from about 20 different countries, very predominantly in the global north. So we started life 30 years ago now, very focused on creating education for philanthropists who were kind of going around saying, there's more that we could do. We can be much more strategic, but there's nowhere to learn where to do it. And this was even like predating Google. And so an education program was established, and that ran for many years, and people did that within a cohort. And what was established kind of along the way, very organically, was it was the community of people that they were doing that program with, but was every bit as important as the education. And so about 5 years ago now, we transitioned very intentionally to being a community of practice and a community of action. And some of our guiding principles are focused on that philanthropy should include strategic, urgent change. We need to challenge the inequitable systems to advance social justice. Giving absolutely must be increased, and it must be unrestricted. And we've heard that from a number of other people over the last couple of days. We seek to address root causes rather than just treating symptoms, and all resources must be leveraged. So we talk a lot about the 4 T's: time, talent, treasure, ties. Each of those plays a critical role in addressing some of the challenges that we seek to help society overcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Naila Farouki. I'm the CEO of the Arab Foundations Forum, which is a network, a membership network of donors and funders and other philanthropy actors working across the Arab region. Very happy to be here. A lot of my members are in the room, so I'm equally excited to see them. And just looking forward to having an interesting, I hope, interesting and insightful conversation with all of you. Thank you.
Okay, so first, thank you for the song, because I know it was my fault that we had a Latin American song to start this session. My name is Paula Fabiani. I lead IDIS, the Institute for the Development of Social Investment, a nonprofit organization in Brazil. We have been running for 25 years. We actually run the Brazilian Philanthropy Forum. We're cousins, me and Mosun, as partners of the Global Philanthropy Forum. And we also represent the Charity Aid Foundation, a UK-based organization that promotes philanthropy for 100 years. IDIS is an organization that does consulting for families, for companies, and for nonprofits. We also have projects to transform the ecosystem of philanthropy in Brazil. And we also run knowledge projects like research, publications, and events like the Brazilian Philanthropy Forum. I transitioned from the private sector. I came from the financial sector, and I've been in the nonprofit world longer than I was in the private sector, much happier, I can say. And I also did a PhD in corporate philanthropy, which is a topic that got into my head after the pandemic, because we had records of giving from corporations during the pandemic. So I'm so glad to be here, Mosum. I want to thank you so much and the team for having me here. It is really an honor to be here today.
Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you to Antonio, who is not a movie star, Mary Lou, and Naila. And Paula, it's not your fault that we dance to that music. Brazil is one of the two countries in the world, I won't tell you the other one, that I went to and I did not recognize myself. I will just say what happens in Brazil stays in Brazil. So this is a very interesting conversation because we're talking about how philanthropy can drive transformation on the African continent. And we know that oftentimes philanthropy is compared to, at least philanthropy in the global south, is compared to or described like philanthropy in the global north. And it's very different. Our context is different. Africa is not a country. You've heard that several times. And I know those in this room know that Africa is not a country. We're heterogeneous, we're multilingual, but the challenges we're trying to solve on the continent are similar to challenges in some other parts of the global south. And these regions and these countries have leveraged philanthropy to drive transformation in their regions or countries. And that's why we believe it's important to learn from those who are in similar situations, in similar regions, with similar contexts as Africa, and see what we can adapt, what we can learn, and even how we can collaborate and what we can do together. So we always say that philanthropy is not new to us in Africa. Obviously, philanthropy is not an African word, but the spirit of philanthropy is ingrained in Africans. We're communal. We rally around one another. When someone dies, someone is getting married. I mean, it takes a village to raise a child. We know that. If you're, especially back then, going to school, a whole village sends a child to school. And so we have a spirit of giving. We have a spirit of pulling resources together. And what is new and what is evolving in Africa is the concept of strategic philanthropy. And that is what we promote at African Philanthropy and what many of the organizations in the room and also on the panel with me promote. And so I'm going to come to Paula with my first question around, the fact that philanthropy is evolving in Africa from just being charitable and us giving in a way that is not deliberate. Are you seeing that not just in Brazil? Are you seeing that in Latin America? Is it evolving to a point where philanthropists and foundations are becoming more strategic in the way they give?
Yes, I think that first I just want to share my thoughts about the similarities that I see from Brazil, from Latin America, and also the African continent. Brazil has a great influence from Africa. We have more than half of Brazilians have African heritage. So I think the solidarity that I see here, I see in Brazil, but in different perspectives. We also share the colonial heritage. We've been a colony from Portugal, and as some of the countries here in this continent, we have gone through a democratization process. We were a dictatorship for a while, and then we went through the redemocratization process, and democracy, which we thought was a given, has been an issue for philanthropy in the last years as well in my country. Another thing is that the endowments, like long-term funding, is also something that I don't see as a common practice here. It's something that is evolving, but in my country as well. We didn't have even a legislation to establish an endowment until 2019, a couple of years ago. This is one of the works that we have been doing at Aegis to advocate for a better regulatory environment, and endowments is one of the topics that we've been disseminating with the government and also with philanthropists. And actually, I have to tell that we got a grant from Mackenzie Scott, the American philanthropist. Oh, thank you. And we have decided to establish our endowment to foster strategic philanthropy in the country, because it's hard to fundraise for research, for debates, for actions that can foster the culture of giving and we decided to have at least part of the funding for that on the long term. And finally, I would like to bring some data about the World Giving Index, because it's been impressive how African countries have improved in the World Giving Index published by the Charity Aid Foundation, which looks into donation of money to nonprofits, volunteering, and help a stranger, which is the basic form of solidarity. And we have Kenya in second place in the world. And 5 years ago, we didn't have that many African countries in top positions. We have Gambia, and we have Gambia fourth, Nigeria fifth. We are actually number 86, far away from my African friends, but we were in 18 after the pandemic. So there is always movement. Actually, Morocco improved last year, even though it's around a position of 103, but improved with the earthquake, which shows how emergencies influence giving. And our role is how we can transform this propensity to give, to donate, and to contribute into a long-term strategy, and with the focus of systemic change, which is what we call strategic philanthropy. So to Musum's questions, we see in Latin America this move, this shift towards strategic philanthropy, systemic change. We also have the trust-based philanthropy has gained traction in the last year. There's a lot of debate about institutional funding, like Mackenzie's Scott, donate to do whatever you want to do, but also relationships that are based on trust. I saw also in some of the panels that the fall of barriers between philanthropic capital and financial capital. I mean, there are no frontiers anymore. We can use both capitals or all capitals to transform society. This is also happening in Brazil. We have some blended structure, some philanthropists investing in impact investing, and also taking an approach to listen to stakeholders. I also heard in one of the panels, I love this term, the stakeholder capitalism, with this capitalism that really takes care of all stakeholders in society. But also from the point of view of philanthropy, philanthropic practices are becoming more inclusive and listening to the ones that really are the focus of the work. And finally, the involvement of corporations. This has been going on in Brazil a lot. I had a very nice conversation that in this continent it varies depending on the country, how corporations get involved. And I urge you to really work with corporations, because there is a great potential, because corporations, they not only have financial assets, but they have logistics, they have capacities, competencies that could be used as a force for good. And if you really can involve a corporation, not only to donate money, but also to use its capacities, its infrastructure to foster social and environmental changes, I think this is a very important partner that we should count on. And in Brazil, we launched the 1% commitment, which was based on the pledge 1%, which is for corporations to donate 1% of their profits. And so it's a movement to really make corporations commit, because what we saw during the pandemic, and this was sort of the focus of my PhD, is that corporations have the resources to donate, because they donated in really significant amounts during the pandemic. Why they did not continue doing that? Why they're so episodic or emergential? They do it in an emergency, but not as a long-term strategy. And I think having structures that help corporations pursue long-term strategies, integrate the strategies with their own strategies, and listen to the stakeholders is a very potent path for them to continue investing in social and environmental activities. And the ESG agenda helps in that regard. It's also something very powerful to talk to corporations and involve them, because philanthropy is a very easy way to tackle the S, the social. And we also have another activity that we helped launch in Brazil, which is the Pact for Racial Equity. We have a really important racial inequity in our country, and this has been not really debated along the last years, but now it's becoming a very important topic. And the idea is that corporations invest looking internally how their practices are, but also funding organizations that combat racial inequality in society, because you cannot change internally and not change externally. And the Racial Equity Pact is a movement with companies in the SG agenda to really make them look into both directions. So just to finish, I think we share an evolution of philanthropy, similar to here. Maybe in some aspects, like I mentioned, the corporations, maybe we evolved more because also of our tax system that favors corporations. In some others, we don't, like individual philanthropy. I think African countries are more evolved in individual philanthropy. I see similarities in family philanthropy, family foundations. But what I believe deeply is that the Global South can influence global philanthropy to a more inclusive, local-based, and impactful philanthropy.
Thank you very much, Paula, for sharing those similarities. And even in corporate philanthropy, there are quite a number of similarities, but you made an important point, depending on which country you are at. But your references to emergencies is very important, and that's a perfect segue to my next question. We are fantastic at pulling resources during emergencies. If there is an earthquake, if there is a pandemic, if there is a landslide, we rally around those causes, and we do it very well. Again, I think it's because of how we are as Africans. We're communal. And in 2020, Africans nearly tripled their giving because of the pandemic, and then we've gone to bed. And I'll come to Naila to address this next question. Naila, you are in the MENA region. I mean, your work involves Africa, but it goes outside of Africa. And I would like to know, because we, as Paula said, we need to build systems and structures. We need to build infrastructure that would ensure that our giving is sustained beyond emergencies and can be transformative. Can you share what you're seeing in this region, in the region in which you are working, and if you have any examples of giving practices that have led to transformative impact?
Thank you. So first of all, I think it's really important to contextualize this part of the conversation given where we are sitting today. So just a little fun fact about the birthplace of philanthropy. The very first ever recorded act of philanthropy, the very first ever endowment that is recorded in history was recorded in 859 AD in Morocco by a woman. And it's an endowment that remains to this day in the University of Qarawiyyin. So I think it's critical to remember that, right? When we're talking about what transformation looks like, and when we're considering it in the modern sense of the word versus what we can look at historically, right? So I think it's, that's one thing. And I'm always very excited to kind of share that story, because I think oftentimes we end up on a lot of platforms and in a lot of conversations where people want to talk about what is strategic philanthropy from a very Western perspective, from a very Western lens, and they're talking to us, literally the people who invented philanthropy. So anyway, that's one thing. The other thing, again, around the power of this sector, I think one of the flexibilities that you didn't mention is also that we're very fast to act in the middle of a genocide, which we are currently in the middle of now. And I'm not only talking about the genocide in Gaza. We know that we're looking at a genocide in Sudan. I know that we're looking at horrific circumstances in the Congo. So these are all countries that are part of this continent that we're talking about. So I'll talk a little bit about the transformational power of what philanthropy has been able to do for the context that is very personal to me. So I'm half Palestinian. I wear it proudly. The one thing that we've noticed in this last 13 months is that when you compare what institutional philanthropy has been able to do in the middle of this crisis, which I think by all accounts, whatever side of it you're on, I think we can all agree is pretty much a historically pivotal moment in our history. I think this is a moment that is going to change the course of the world. And it will have an impact on so many other things and so many other sectors. And one of the things that we recognize, so again, I represent a network of foundations, donors, and philanthropy actors that work across this sector. And so it's a pretty, it's a pretty representative network of actors in this sector. And the one thing that I can tell you anecdotally, because we still don't have enough of the data to support this, but anecdotally I can tell you that individual philanthropy, the philanthropy from the people, by the people, for the people, is the one reason why we have Gazans who are still alive today. Because institutional philanthropy has not lived up to the potential of its power, right? And so, again, another point of comparison that I can make, the Ukraine, institutional philanthropy, and I'm not talking about official development assistance, I'm not talking about government assistance, institutional philanthropy, foundations, donors, pledged upwards of $120 billion in the first year of the invasion of Ukraine. We're looking at potentially somewhere in the couple of $100 million in Palestine. And so to me, this is a very glaring, it poses very glaring questions. And I think a lot of these questions are questions that many of us in this room contend with anyway in the work that we do every single day when it comes to, decolonizing the kind of aid that we're trying to do, decoupling ourselves from our own colonized minds. Again, I'm half Egyptian, half Palestinian. You can't get a lot more colonized than that. And that's a process that we have to go through. It's a process of us kind of, disavowing ourselves of these notions that we are raised with and that we take into our work, that we take into our actions and into our activism. So again, the one thing that I've noticed, and it's a heartbreak from the personal side, but on the professional side, when I think about what does it look like to lead and guide my network through a transformational process, it's worth noting that, in the middle of a genocide and the ethnic cleansing of 2.5 million people, the people who stood up and the kind of philanthropy that made a difference is the philanthropy of my friends and my peers and my family. It is not the philanthropy of my sector. And so that's something to harness and look at how we need to transform our sector to address the people who are actually making a difference.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Naila, for situating this conversation in the current, in today's world, what we're going through right now, what everyone is living through right now. And you started something that is continuing after our session, which is on people power. And, the power that people in communities have that a lot of institutions may not be able to harness. And I'm coming to you. You are with Forward Global, and you majorly work with philanthropists in the global north, but a lot of them are also supporting organizations and initiatives in the global south. And I know that there are emerging behaviors that are changing or driving change in this space because of all that is happening in the world today. Can you share a bit more about how this is changing and how things are shifting in your own network and community?
Gladly. Thank you for the question, Mohsen. I mean, I don't think anyone here needs a reminder of what philanthropy means, but I'm just going to state it because I think it's important. It's the love of mankind. So it's how are we really understanding and supporting our fellow human beings. I was briefly amused a couple of weeks ago when someone asked me what I did before I did this role, and without giving me a moment to answer, they said, "Oh, you must have been a behavioural psychologist." And I said, no, I wasn't at all. And in fact, that would be some incredible skills, because actually it feels like so much of what we're trying to do is really help to shift mindsets, get those shifts to become behaviours, and really get those to shift norms, so that you're almost taking it from sort of conversations that might happen here out to real societal change. So a lot of times when we start working with philanthropists and we work with individuals, so the wealth holders who are deploying their own resources, they might come at a very early stage, they might come at a more advanced stage, sort of saying, actually, I know there's a role for me to come back here and really share what I've been seeing, what I've been learning, where I've tripped up, and where I can really help leapfrog that, the journey for others. And we really start by also trying to build confidence. I think that's something that we've seen a lack of. There's a lot of funds that go unspent because people don't know what to do, they don't know where to start. And so a lot of it is about thinking, where are those places that you can go to build some of that confidence, or to do it in partnership and collaboration. We also really think about encouraging humility, curiosity, ongoing learning, and listening deeply. And not enough of that has happened over the years, that real deep listening. What is it that you're going to do differently after you've had a conversation with someone that you wouldn't have done before? And that goes for, wherever you are in the world. Someone used the phrase earlier that the pandemic was an opportunity. I think within our organisation, we did see some positive shifts. We saw that people went from, instead of kind of saying, okay, who can you introduce me to in my neighbourhood, in my part of town, in my part of the world, instead kind of seeing on Zoom all of these wonderful boxes. You didn't care where the person in the box next to you came from. And suddenly, without almost kind of making it happen, we saw all this cross-pollination of ideas that were happening, because people didn't care what breakout room they were in. And suddenly they were kind of going, oh, God, that's a really interesting intervention. I never would have thought to do that. And so it really kind of, it was a real big shift for people, moving away from kind of much more local giving and thinking. We also saw an increase in some of the trust-based philanthropic practices that people have mentioned. I think some of those, unfortunately, have dialed back a little bit, and we want to kind of promote some of those. Some of the kind of the speed with which funds were moved, decision-making that was kind of centered more deeply on communities that were experiencing some of the biggest challenges, and whether that was on domestic violence or the challenges in digital education or food banks. There were too many to name, really. Throughout all of this, I think the importance of community often lies in the peer-to-peer influence. And so whilst we don't want to sit in any kind of echo chamber, what we've really seen over the years, and particularly since we made that shift from being, educational programs that anyone could kind of show up to an ongoing, lifelong community, you've got people that, we can host a great convening, and this is what we do fairly regularly at Forward Global, and you set the scene and you bring forward incredible activists and innovators and new voices and wisdom. But you notice that actually often it's the conversations that are happening on the sides between those people who are out there doing the philanthropy that actually get the changes. So after our global summit that was earlier this year in New York, someone was telling me that they'd had a conversation with someone else that said, right, so you're saying that you're really deeply committed to the climate agenda, and yet you've got an endowed foundation that's set up to exist in perpetuity. Sorry, how committed to climate actually are you? And this person, within 6 months, has moved to a spend-down foundation where they will be deploying all of their assets in the next 10 years. And that for us is that was just something that happened, because when you have a community and when you've built trust within that community, you're able to challenge. So you've got enough sort of social capital, enough kind of understanding of, values-aligned behaviours, and that you're fighting towards the same thing, that someone can respectfully challenge you and really push you to do more. We had our own name change last year, so we moved from being called previously the Philanthropy Workshop to Forward Global. And part of that was really also saying, we had philanthropy in the name, philanthropy is valiant and wonderful, but actually we wanted to say there are more tools out there, and actually impact is the end goal. And how are you considering which vehicles are going to be the most valuable for you to deploy? And we've also seen, a number of people saying we want 100% mission-aligned investments. and by investments talking about, whether that is their philanthropy or their investments themselves. A couple of other thoughts that have come up recently that we've really seen a growing interest in. So one is the idea of enoughness. And so Lisa, when she sat here last night and shared her wonderful energy and thoughts and wisdom, talked about spare capacity, which is a phrase that seemed to have resonated with people. Often, and again, I'm generalizing, but kind of to make the point, people sort of think, right, okay, I've got a bit of spare capacity. So I'm now going to decide, right, I'm going to give away X percentage. Well, X tends to be quite small, and that's fine. You need an on-ramp, you need to start to get comfortable, you need to do your learning grants. But actually, what if you started from the opposite way around and sort of said, let me actually really look at all of my assets, liquid, illiquid, whatever those might look like, and it's a big task, and then say, okay, how do I get to a point where I know that I've got enough for my family, for my village, for the next generation potentially, and then what's left? And it can be quite an onerous project to undertake, but the figure that people are coming up with is so much larger than they ever could have imagined. And so we've got a number of circles within the organization where people are having these conversations, and it's without judgment. That has to be critical. It's, people have to make decisions about what they think they need to keep, but they're all coming out with a much larger number that they're willing to go out and deploy. And because they've done it in a group, there's that accountability as well. There's some real transparency. And then I think I'll end on just another challenge, which is the biggest issue for many people is that time is the most limited asset. So how do you really get people to figure out what's your priority? Where can I best deploy the 4 T's, your time, your talent, your treasure, and your ties? That's the challenge. And how do you do that and really work out what your unique role is? So we've heard lots about whether it's risk capital, whether it's centering communities, but I think there's something about really deciding what time do you have and how do you best deploy that and what are the biggest levers that you can exercise in doing so.
Thank you very much, Mary Lou. I'm loving the idea of enoughness. And I think it's important for us to begin to look at our giving from that lens. Not just deciding, oh, I am going to give 2%, but to really look at the whole picture and decide what you have left and make good use of that. I'm coming to you, Antonio. You're very sub-Saharan. You're not from another part of the global south. You're not Latin American and you're not Asian, but you represent a network. So Antonio is from a network of networks. So all of us belong to Antonio's network. And you work with networks that are in other parts of the global south, not sub-Saharan. And we just had a panel on funds flow, and I know they talked a lot about remittances. We won't rehash what that conversation was about, but we're interested in knowing how the lessons from other parts of the global south on how we can harness the potential of remittances in a way that it will be transformative and will lead to systemic change in Africa. Thank you.
Great. For clarity, it's not my network, just in case. Yeah, so WINGS is a global network, and we have over 97 members spread across 3 regions. That's Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and then Asia and the Pacific. But I'll focus on, a lot was said when I listened to the panel before, and, remittance aid and what diaspora giving has done. And I said, okay, all my notes are not necessary now. But there are 2 things that I just wanted to focus on. One is, across the 3 regions, we see the enabling environment for philanthropy standing out. And this is a big factor. I like the triangle that the gentleman from Elevate Philanthropy used, and I hope it's not intellectual property. I could also use it. There are 3 things we see, when we talk about governments being involved, the private sector being involved, and then philanthropy being involved. These are very critical for diaspora giving to thrive. And that sweet spot at the circle for me is what we call the enabling environment for philanthropy. And we see that in Asia, and not the entire Asia, but the countries where there's an enabling environment for diaspora giving to thrive, we see aspects of venture philanthropy stepping in. And this is very important to improve what diaspora giving is doing, because some of these concepts can only be tested by, capital being invested in the ideas. And this only happens through venture philanthropy. And so where there's risk being taken, you look at India, for example, just as a case study, and we were comparing it earlier, India, Nigeria, and then Mexico, those that we see have a high remittance aid. If you're to look at the figures and say, what are some of these factors that contribute to this? And we could go into an entire discussion of what that entails. But we see that wherever there's been an opportunity for the politics, the technical aspect, and then the bureaucracies to merge, then venture philanthropists have had an opportunity to come in and invest. And I think this is very important for philanthropy, because there has to be a risk taken to prove some of these concepts. And once these concepts have been proven, then we have things like the diaspora bonds coming in. I know a number of African countries have attempted the diaspora bonds, I think about 5 countries. But we see that there's still a lot that needs to be done. And we could talk about what these factors are. But the second biggest thing I think we need to look at is, and this also involves risk, is the technology aspect. If you're to compare where the technologies are thriving with the networks in Asia, look at Latin America, and then compare that to sub-Saharan Africa, we see that where technologies are thriving, then diaspora giving actually is improving. And so there's a need for philanthropy to look at the aspects of how do we invest in technology. And that's not going to come cheap. I remember someone yesterday said they're looking for real philanthropy, the money. And we're talking about 40s. But when they said real philanthropy, I understood them. Because there has to be money that is injected in this, and philanthropy is at that place where they have to play that role. So just making a comparative analysis, I think, not to re-echo what had been said earlier, I think that the diaspora giving aspects will thrive with an enabling environment, and that's where we have governments, the bureaucracies, the private sector, the corporate philanthropies coming in. And I think the challenge to us in this room is, I think there's a big aspect of language. If we're going to invite venture philanthropies to the room, I liked the presentation from Kuramo Capital yesterday, because you hear some of the language that would otherwise have been sugar-coated in this space. We are fostering collaboration, and it's catalytic capital. How do we get the capital that then helps others come in? And I think that's the role of venture philanthropy. I hope that answers it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Antonio. And I think the biggest takeaway is philanthropy needs to be bold. Philanthropy needs to take risks. We need to de-risk the space so that others have trust. They know we have skin in the game, and they can come in after we have put in our money. I'm supposed to take a next round of questions, but I'm going to go to the audience now to take questions before, and if we have time, because I have made life challenging for other facilitators, there's no way I'm going above 1 hour. So I'll take quick questions, and I mean quick questions, like I am not nice. Quick questions. No, I'm not looking for another speaker. We are the speakers. So, yes. I see Aisha, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Aisha. Just picking up on what was said about the core of philanthropy being one-on-one individuals. Can we talk a bit more about how we scale that? Are there any ideas for scaling that to a point where it becomes more impactful beyond the next person that you help? Thank you.
Thank you. Great example. Thank you for going first. Short and sweet. Everyone be like Aisha. Who next? Yes, please.
Building on what Aisha said, I've been hearing a tension between the fact that institutional philanthropy needs to be strategic, and they seem to not be as present when there's a crisis, which leads to a question from the prior panels: how do you take advantage of a crisis with a strategic long-term view. And you could pick any crisis. We could pick the Sudan, the forgotten war. But I just love to hear the thinking of this group, which is focused on transformation. How would you make the most of one of the major crises happening in Africa today or in the global south?
Thank you very much. Anyone else? It's either you're tired or we've done a great job. Almaz. Short and sweet.
Yes. I think I'm going to go back to the question on how the philanthropists were mobilized and to follow up, but I'm going to go straight to the Palestine. Could you just give us some idea of what is taking place and what can be done from your own point of view? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Almaz. I'll come straight to you, Naila, because I think all the questions are sort of centered around individuals. But I know that we all have contributions, so I'll start with you, Naila.
Sure. So for the Arab Foundations Forum, one of the things that we did almost immediately, so, October 7th, I think probably by October 12th or 13th of last year, I'm Palestinian. I'm half Palestinian. I've always been half Palestinian. I live in that reality my entire life. I never, ever had any expectations that all of a sudden anybody was going to come in and save us, okay? So as someone who sits, representing a network of donors, I did not have any expectations that even our members were going to be the ones that were going to step in and do anything meaningful. And by meaningful, I mean in terms of the money. I don't mean in terms of the solidarity and any of that, which has been, beyond moving. But so the first thing that we did is we collected a group of our members together who were able to very quickly and who had the agility to immediately serve the population on the ground in Gaza, okay? So we started a pooled fund, which was, gratefully something that we were able to do because we're not registered in the Arab region. I mean, it's the ridiculousness of all ridiculousness, but we're an entity that is registered as a 501c3 in the US, and that's the only reason that we were able to mobilize enough funding quickly enough without having to go through a series of restrictions and regulations that would not have allowed us to do this. And having said that, we still stand to lose all of that if in one day someone decides that supporting Palestine is illegal in the US. And, you've seen, I don't know if you've seen, actually, I don't know if you're following the news as closely as I am, but the UNRWA agency in the Israeli Knesset yesterday banned it from providing any support and aid to Palestine. And UNRWA is the largest and longest running UN agency that has supported Palestine refugees. And that's a very specific distinction to make. It's not Palestinian refugees, not simply Palestinian. It's refugees of the Palestine crisis, because there are Lebanese and Syrian and others and Egyptians and others who are affected by this. So UNRWA was established in 1949. And the scale of the kind of support that UNRWA can provide to Palestine refugees is unmatched. If every single other organization that works in Palestine banded together, they would not be able to fill the gap that UNRWA fills. And as of today, UNRWA can no longer support Palestinians. That is a catastrophe, okay? So frankly, in all honesty, Almaz, it doesn't really matter what anybody else is doing. Because we're not going to be able to cover the need that's required. But one of the other things that I think is really, again, critical when we're talking about transformation and in these rooms, there's no point in us, and forgive me if I sound cynical or if I'm just exhausted. I'm just exhausted. There's no point in us having these conversations about things that seem hopeful or optimistic if we're not willing to aggressively confront the actual problems that we ourselves allow to happen in our own regions. And so I point to Kenya, 3 days ago or 4 days ago, granting akin to diplomatic immunity to one of the largest global North foundations, grant-making foundations in the world. And those privileges include immunity from prosecution for crimes. And that immunity extends to not only the person working in that organization, but to their dependents, to their spouses. And it's almost like we don't learn anything. I mean, you just go back a couple of years and look at the Oxfam scandal and what happened with that. And this wasn't even something that was hidden. And now you have a government that is supposed to be driving a post-colonial kind of system, going back to exactly the kind of thing that got us into this mess in the first place. So honestly, sometimes when those things happen, I think to myself, like, really frankly, what's the point? Right? What's the point of us driving from our local networks, from our regional networks, to push for the dignity and the reclamation of power and the decolonization of aid and the shifting, and then the people who are supposed to protect us in that space, our governments, are the people who are as quickly and as willingly just giving it away to white people.
Thank you very much, Naila. But I know we're tired. We really are. Physically, mentally, in every way. Sometimes I feel jaded. But this is why we do what we do. We just have to keep going. We have to keep pushing. We have to keep having these conversations until things change. Paula, do you have any contributions to these questions? Thank you.
Very quickly, Masoom, just to Naila's point, I think we should be the hope of the world, because I had some conversations before, and one of the things that is going on with the next generations that they're not hoping for the future. They have no hopes because there's climate change, there's so much going on. It's just such a horrible world that our generation has left for them, and they do not have hope. If you don't have hope, you don't do anything, because there's only when there is hope that you do. And I have hope that we can get together and find ways and maybe feel my compassion to you, to your tiredness, and count on us on that. But anyway, just talking about the conversation about giving, how we can promote. We have done the Brazil Giving Research to find paths to promote giving in Brazil. And the one thing that I was really amazed by is that Brazilians don't want to talk about giving. How can you promote giving if you don't talk about giving? So one thing that should be done to promote giving among individuals is talk about it. The legal environment is also, it can incentivize giving, or it can hinder culture of giving. So working with governments, and the last session was about that, we have to work with governments, even though we don't like governments, we don't like the government that is in place, but the government, they have scale. They reach much more people than philanthropy can. So work with governments. And I hope that giving becomes something very cool, very nice, very trendy. So work with the famous people to make this citizenship act, because giving is a citizenship, it's a participatory act to change society, as something very cool and very trendy in our societies. And around the emergencies, what we have been trying to do in Brazil, not very successfully, but trying, is work with communities to build resilience, because the emergencies are going to happen and happen. We had just the flooding in the south, which was horrible. The whole state was underwater. And now there is the drought in the Amazon region. Many communities have no access to anything. But build resilience in communities, and this has to be done in between emergencies. Work on mitigation initiatives and preventive actions. That's what we can do, and this has to be something that we're doing so for philanthropies. I think there is always the need to have some money for that, because that's how we can help the most vulnerable to face, because they are the most affected by the emergencies. And community foundations, I think it's also something, because they do local work. They take care of the most vulnerable when it's hard for philanthropists to reach.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paula. We'll go into our closing statements now, and I will start with Mary Lou. Less of a statement really from you. I would like for you to touch on one or two examples that you believe would be relevant to this conversation around, the emerging shifts in behavior that you initially discussed. And we have 9 minutes, 26 seconds. So you have a minute and a half.
Okay, I'll speak really quickly in that case. No, first of all, I think one of the challenges that hasn't yet been noted is that the whole sector is so opaque, and it is really hard to find case studies and role models of where work is being genuinely transformational. We have very similar issues in the UK around the privacy around wealth. Wealth still feels like a very dirty topic, and it is stifling the ability to discuss philanthropy and change. So a few examples, I would say something that's occurred to me for us, a real shift we've seen is people starting to fund a lot more in activism, so supporting activists and campaigners doing extraordinary work. That is probably much more difficult in this context of the African continent. But it is something that philanthropy shouldn't be joining at the end of those movements. It should be seeding those movements and really seeing the potential for change. We've been delighted to see an acceleration towards local leadership across a wonderful set of organisations who've been shifting the power and saying we can't have people sitting in the global north dictating what's going on in the global south. A couple of examples of organisations I would mention specifically would be Pivot and Blue Ventures, both in Madagascar, who've been really vocal about those shifts. Participatory grant making is something that we are really excited about, and we've observed a number of philanthropists taking some quite radical approaches around that. So to the degree even of not even sitting in on their own board meetings because they have a funding committee made up of a set of experts, people with lived experiences, leaders, activists, who are given a pot of money and then they decide what to do with it. And of course, there's the example of Marlene Engelhorn, who's done something very similar in Vienna, bringing together a group of, I think, 50 Austrians to decide how to spend her inheritance. There's also, final comment from me, that the +1 approach, as pioneered by the Roddenberry Foundation. Ask me if you want to know more.
Thank you so much, Mary Lou. I'm coming to you, Paula. A minute and a half. Quick recommendations that you have for the APF community.
Oh, thank you, Muson. I think we heard so much during this day, the last days, and the opening sessions, the dinner session. Work, collaborate. Collaborate is the word, the key word. We cannot do things alone. Take risks, like Antonio said. I mean, we cannot innovate if we don't risk, if we don't take risks. And I see it, at least in my country, and I see in other places, that philanthropy is risk averse instead of being risk takers, which is very important to innovate. I like the use of technology. I think there's technology can really maybe make things more agile, reach people that are not possible to reach, and evaluate, look at what you're doing and try to improve, even with the challenges of impact evaluations. I talked about other sources of giving, tackle other sources of giving, but philanthropy should always have some money for emergencies and to foster a culture of giving, because that's how you have a catalytic impact in society and you have more people participating. But my message is we need individuals, we need families, we need corporations, foundations, and we need the government to create a better society that do not leave anyone behind. That's how we can really imagine a future where we can have hope for a better world for our children, for whoever is coming next, even though now it seems we are in a big mess.
Thank you so much, Paula. We need all hands on deck. Naila, what should philanthropists keep at the top of mind at this time?
Okay, so I'm going to try not to be doomsday and horrified. So I think after all is said and done, there's a few things that kind of echo what everyone on this stage has also said and what everyone in this room has been saying for a long time. But I think they warrant a little bit of attention to the consequence of what these words mean. Okay, so I think that Yes, we need to take more integrated approaches, but we need to pay attention to what that integration looks like and who are we integrating, right? So when we say things like localization, these are not just words that we are throwing out, and we should not just be throwing these words around. They need to mean something. So when I talk about localized efforts in the region, I don't mean that I'm going to go bring a group of consultants from anywhere in the world, and particularly from the global north, to come and tell me and my people how to do what they're supposed to be doing. And I won't allow anyone to put me in a room with that kind of integrative model. That's number one. And I think if enough of us were to stand up and say no, then people will stop doing that. The second thing is, I think that, again, words matter. So when we say things like capacity building, we're going to produce capacity building models. We don't need to build our capacity. We have a ton of capacity. We are a continent, 50% of whom are under the age of 25. There is capacity. What you need to focus on, and what we need to collectively focus on, is the development of that capacity in a way that is dignified, in a way that is empowering, in ways that are enabling, and in ways that allow people not to feel marginalized every step of the way, which goes back to what we mean when we say collaborative and what we mean when we say integrating. And then finally, really, it's a question of standing up for our rights, for our dignity, and for the power of what kind of shift rooms like this are not only able to make, but frankly should be allowed to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naina. Powerful. Antonio, what infrastructure do we need to create an enabling environment for philanthropy to thrive?
1
Last
minute,
words.
30 seconds. Wow. So I'll just conclude with, transformation, and we all know this, that transformation takes time. That's a given. But then what we do in that time is as important as the transformation itself. So Wings, with a number of, partners across the globe, have developed a framework, the Philanthropy Transformation Initiative, abbreviated PTI. And this framework, talks about 3 mindset shifts and 10 principles that we invite those that are doing funding across the globe to look at. And I think for me that, in a nutshell, that would be it. If you want to understand what the journey of transformation could be like for you as a funder, for you as an organization, I'm happy for you to look at the Philanthropy Transformation Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Thank you to the wonderful panelists. I think, this is all. All right. This has been fantastic. I would want to leave all of us with what was shared at Donga. I believe it was at the Adesso meeting about, there was a definition. There were many definitions, but one of the definitions of localization that stuck with me is, locally led. That's it. We are the one here before the problem. We are here during the problem, and we're here after the problem. No one, Naila said, no one is coming to save us. We're going to save ourselves, and we're calling on African philanthropists to rise up to the responsibility of putting money where money is needed for Africans by Africans. Thank you very much.